Hello, my friend. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Pete Dupuis, and we're talking about your membership policies, specifically how and when to enforce your membership policies really strictly and when to be more flexible. I think it's a great conversation, and if you're not sure exactly how firm to be in pushing your membership policies, I think it's a great episode for you. Also, quick note, my audio and video might be a little different this week because I'm traveling, but I'll be back to the regular setup soon. But I hope you enjoy this episode. Have a good one. Hello, fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. And today I'm here with Mr. Dupuis. What's up, Pete?
Hello there, Mr. Keeler. Good to be
Good
back.
to see you. Good to see you, my friend. Before we dive into today's topic, I just want to give a quick shout out to Mark Fisher's YouTube channel. My friends, Mark Fisher is putting out like multiple videos every single week on YouTube, specifically about running your training gym. They're short, they're pithy, they're actionable. So go right now, head over to YouTube and subscribe to his YouTube channel because I think you're really going to enjoy it. If you like this podcast, you're going to like the YouTube channel. He covers a lot of the same topics, and if you're a visual learner like me, and podcasts aren't always the best way for you to learn. I shouldn't say that as a podcast host. You should go over to YouTube, and there's lots of visuals to kind of pique your visual interest over there. Let's jump into today's topic. Today's topic actually came from a listener. So thank you, dear listener, for submitting this topic. And the topic was, how and when do you decide to enforce your membership policies? So when do you, when are you a stickler and really kind of dig your heels in and really with your members reinforce what your policies are? When do you get more flexible and allow exceptions? And I love this topic because I think Pete and I have very different approaches. Like what happens at Cressy's might be really different that happens in MFF. So we hope in this conversation we can illustrate for you there's not one right way to do this. And we'll maybe kind of talk about our different approaches. But for context, let me just define some terms. When I talk about membership policies, this person was specifically asking about things like pausing your membership, missing classes and doing them over, having credits that roll over or don't roll over. These are the kinds of policies she was asking about. So that's what we're going to have in mind as we have this conversation. But Pete, you want to talk a little bit about your approach to your membership policies and how much you enforce them or don't?
Yeah, well, during our brainstorming portion of this podcast leading into it, I said to you, I don't know about that topic because I don't enforce them as hard as I probably could. For us, policies of this nature would be like late cancellation fees, our requests for how clients adhere to scheduling protocols and things of that nature, and billing related policies. For example, we offer an unlimited training rate that is easily manipulated by a client if we aren't super, super clear upfront about the timetable that it covers and how we bill. So there are just a certain number of levers that I could pull as far as consequences for people being non-compliant. But as I mentioned before, I don't use them that often. And
Mm,
in my words to you were, you kind of got to be a pretty big asshole for me to start flipping those switches, be
yep.
a repeat offender, somebody who is habitually taking advantage. But they are tools nonetheless, things that I can use to clean up the way the place operates. And in my defense, what I said to you, and I'll stand by it, is that if I were in a market like yours, doing the volume you do in a space that is kind of a bottleneck, I would be an absolute stickler about enforcing policies of this nature. So it's not that I don't believe in them, it's just that they aren't quite so necessary to enforce in our space because we have a uniquely large footprint and a lot of flexibility and a lot of capacity. And I can be super flexible to be nice if I need to.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great perspective and it works for you all, right? And even though you may not enforce them a lot, every single time, right? The point is that you have them stated, there are clear expectations, and if there are people who are abusing the system in a way that, inconveniences other clients or pisses off you and your team, you have the ability and will go in and, and make a correction and have that
Exactly.
conversation. So let's just kind of keep pulling that string. So I don't know if you can think back to an example of when someone does go over the line, how do you address it?
Oh, so I think the most important thing I can say here is you need to communicate these rules so clearly on the front end that there isn't any gray area. I don't want a
Hmm.
client saying to me, "Well, that was vague to me in the first place." And so
Yeah.
if you have any intention at all of executing on, say, a late cancel policy, then you need to over communicate it early and often. Here are the rules. Please respond acknowledging that you have seen them. That sort of a type of communication. Because if there is any degree of vagueness in it, it's pretty difficult to pull the trigger on saying, "Hey, you're accountable to this penalty." Um, but in our case, it's a multiple strikes and you're out unless you've taken advantage. Like for example, I don't actually require advance payment on booking initial evaluations. I say we're going to take care of it upon your arrival. Um, I know that I probably should, but we haven't always leaned into that. And once you have late canceled on an evaluation, you can't reschedule without paying in advance. That's an
Hmm.
example where I'd say like, all right, we got to put this rule in place, but I just give people a lot of wiggle room. And I think it's partially because as the owner, I have the flexibility to get creative at any moment I want. I mean, I could make up anything on the spot. I could change your price point right now if I wanted to, just because I'm the one who absorbs the burden of that shift, and it just means more price points for me to track. But it doesn't come at the expense of our team. Whereas if you are a gym owner who's also on the training floor and trying to juggle all these things and wear all these hats, I think you need to be maniacal about communicating the rules and executing on the rules right out of the gate with people, because you're going to get walked all over and taken advantage of. And that's just not the way that you're going to scale this thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes 100% sense. I think because, at least in some part, because you're the one who is in the building most days, and you're the one having these conversations, you're comfortable with the complexity that being flexible requires. You can handle that,
Hmm.
right? But for people who are wearing more hats because they're also training on the floor 10, 20, 30 hours per week, or they're delegating these conversations to a team member who can't handle the kind of complexity of all the exceptions being made, then they might need to tighten things up a little bit, which I 100% agree with. Yeah, 100% agree. So I think there's nothing wrong with doing it your way if you have the capacity to handle the complexity that having multiple price points or multiple exceptions makes. Because I think everyone wants to be nice and help each other out. So if you can handle that, fantastic. I think that's awesome, truly.
Well, and I also
And I,
think that sorry, I was going to say the need to execute on these things is really dependent upon how close you are to capacity.
mhm,
Because if you're operating at a place where that late cancel would have otherwise been filled because you're sitting on a waiting list, then yeah, this is a non-negotiable. Those rules are going to need to be executed on.
yeah.
Whereas, as I've said before, I'm sitting in 15,000 square feet of space with a team that can scale up to as many as 10 or 11 coaches at a given time, with a client to coach ratio of a max of potentially 5 to 1, which means that I could theoretically put 50 to 55 people on the training floor every 75 minutes or so for like these long stretches. So I'm never going to be up against
Mhm,
that. I might be up
yep.
against it for small segments of the day, but then I can just ask people to push by 15, 30 minutes if I know that we have like real capacity issues. But for the most part, that isn't my bottleneck. And so I don't feel resentful of somebody who says at the last minute, I've just got too much schoolwork. I've got to push this session. I want people to feel like we give them that flexibility, because I don't want somebody to be adding stress or chaos to their life to
Mm,
force a training session in so as to avoid a late payment penalty that wasn't necessary in the first place. But
yeah.
if I was sitting on a third of the space that I have and we were routinely fully booking out sessions and turning people away
Mm,
who are standing at our door holding money, then this would be a different story. But I just
yeah.
have a little bit more flexibility than most in this sense.
That makes total sense. Yeah, and I'll lay out the landscape of MFF and why I think we kind of by design had to be pretty much on the other end of the spectrum on this topic, right? Which is from day one we had limited space. We're in New York City. We have to use every square inch. And as an example, like our classroom has 15 mats for 15 bodies, period. There's no squeezing them in, there's no flexibility, and even that is insanely squeezed by most non-city standards. Even our small group personal training, which used to be 3-on-1, is now 6-on-1. There's 6 spots. That's it. Anyway, and at our peak kind of pre-COVID numbers with 2 locations, we had about 1,000 active members every month with wait lists for almost everything in the morning and in the afternoon. And even in our earlier years, we had wait lists for prime time in year one. And so for us, we're dealing with the kind of opposite constraints, which is we have no flexibility, and so we have to really treat, give people policies very clearly. And I agree, this whole topic is really a topic of expectation setting, of telling people from day one, this is how we do things around here. And the reason we do them this way around here is because we need to do this in a way that's fair for all of us. We're a tight knit community trying to use this space to the best of its ability. And if we're all going to get fair and equal access to classes and small group training and access to places to put our coats and our bags and our shoes, then we all need to use these policies. They're in place because this helps us all operate efficiently in this space. And then to Pete's point, we have to reiterate those policies again and again and again. So for us, it's part of an onboarding process with clients. There's a client handbook. There's an email series. There's signs in our space explaining our policies. And I will say that we're not trying to be assholes. We're not trying to be dicks, right? Given all those constraints, we still have some flexibility. So for us, most of our policies, not all, but most of our policies come with a one-time get out of jail free policy. And so certainly something like we have a $10 no-show fee. And so we record in our software, which for us, we just use Mindbody. The first time someone no-shows and the fee goes to apply and they're like, hey, wait, I didn't know about this. Great, we'll refund it. No harm done. We make a note today on the XYZ day, I refunded this. But now you can't say you didn't know it anymore. And now you can't say that you didn't cancel and you didn't show and that Matt in class went empty even though we have a wait list of 15 people. You can't say that again because we recorded that you got one get out of jail free card. Yeah. So not knowing is totally fine once. After that, we all have to be on the same page. And our policies have absolutely shifted and adjusted over time. Certainly, in this kind of post-COVID era, that we had to be more flexible early on because we were ramping things back up, and people's lives were, and still are in some cases, in flux. But then we found a flow in this last year, and things are probably pretty strict again. But I think this comes down to, Pete. I think what we're highlighting here is that this is about your capacity at your gym. How much can you afford to be flexible in terms of how much space and time you have, and how much human capacity you have to track those exceptions. And then it also, comes down to this whole thing is an expectation setting game. The better you are at setting expectations and reinforcing them over time, I think the less kind of drama, the less kind of tension-filled client conflicts you'll have to manage. But this is something I do think that you want to be thoughtful about and will evolve over time. Yeah. So was that
Yeah,
clear
and
in
if you're going to be
description?
like me, well, if you're going to be like me and you're going to allow for the flexibility, you need to, no matter what on the front end, act as if that's not the case.
Mm,
So
yeah.
I would say communicate the rules as firmly and definitively as you, Michael Keeler, would at Mark Fisher Fitness, because it affords you the privilege of doing what is perceived to be like a favor or a solid on the back end.
Yes.
If you're going to be flexible, great. You can be the good guy by making every single person feel like you're making an exception. Whereas if you say, "Hey, these are the rules, but I'll be honest, I honestly just don't really enforce any of them." And then when it comes time to do what I said, which is send a message to an asshole, well, there's two versions of that. There's the I told you that I don't even enforce these, but you're such an asshole that here I am doing it. And then there's the I'm gonna execute on these rules because these are the rules, and then you actually do it because somebody's taking advantage. Well, they're still
Yeah.
going to learn the same lesson without you coming across as super passive aggressive. So I would say no matter what, communicate your expectations clearly. And if deep down you intend to make exceptions for everybody all the time because you have the flexibility to do so and you avoid conflict and you're Mr. Nice Guy, that's fine. But you're missing an opportunity to be extra perceived as Mr. Nice Guy by making people feel like you treated them uniquely special and gave them a break that doesn't exist for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's a key kind of customer service tactic there, which is like, even if you're going to be flexible, make it seem like you're making an exception. Make it seem like you're going above and beyond for them. It'll make them feel special. It'll let them know they can't do this all the time. And to add on to that, the thing I used to say to the MFF team all the time when I was there day to day was, let's save our exceptions for the things that are really exception worthy. Right? There's people like, well, I don't know if I can make it. I'm just having a long brunch right now. I don't know if I want to leave in time to get to class. Like, I don't know. Is you want to having an extra mimosa, like the thing that means we should change the schedule, as opposed to people calling and saying, I'm in the hospital or my dog just died. Like those are the things we really want to bend over backwards and make exceptions for. Even at MFF, when we have very hard and strict, rules, we still will make exceptions for real life emergencies. Real life happens. We'll make exceptions for those, obviously. But we also want to give the impression that, your mild inconvenience is a reason to break our rules. Right? Like
Yep.
that's, we have to draw a line somewhere. And that's, it's arguably more art than science. But I think I agree with Pete 100%, which is regardless of how flexible you're going to be, you got to communicate them like they are written in stone.
And there's one whole other conversation that we couldn't do justice during this remaining time, but that is that you need to really make an effort to help your team understand where the options and flexibility lie. Because I've
Mm,
also run into the problem of having an employee trying to do the right thing. This is the rule that Pete laid out.
yes.
Sorry, the rule's the rule, deal with it. Whereas then I have to pop out of my office and be like, whoa, 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 no big deal. We're going to give you a break here. And that's not the employee's fault. If I
Hmm.
didn't do a good job of saying, like, hey, here's the advertised rule, but this is the only circumstance where I'm going to ask that you execute on it. And so you got to coach your team on having the feel, the awareness of the circumstance to know when and how they can finesse it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's similar to like a sales strategy, right? Because a sales conversation, you want everyone to sell everything at full price.
Mhm.
But often in your back pocket, you will have that extra special deal or that, that offer that is extra special that no one knows about. But you want to make sure your team is trained to know in your back pocket, this is some options you have if you really need it to make the client feel special, to go above and beyond, to, exceed their expectations. So I think that's it's really smart, really smart. Yeah. Anything else you want to share about this topic as we kind of wrap things up?
No, I only say no because, like I said, I'm embarrassingly under effective at executing on the rules in certain circumstances. So makes me and then when I do charge people late cancels because they definitely deserved it, I still feel guilty about it the whole time.
Mm,
So
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
soft.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, again, I think it works for you, and I think there's some people even listening to this that can probably get away with that. And for those of you who can't, it's time to get really clear about what your expectations are. Hold people accountable. Give them a one-time get out of jail free card, but then they gotta follow the rules. I think that often, maybe this is maybe fuel for a whole other podcast, but I can also record like a one just of me talking, but there's an approach to having these conversations that we didn't really get to cover in our time today. But there's an approach to having the conversation to say, listen, here's the policy. Let me tell you about why it matters. Let me tell you tell you about how I want to kind of meet you in the middle this time. But moving forward, let's talk about why this thing needs to be in place. So I think it's often something that's missing from these conversations with clients is explaining the why behind the what often goes a long way for them to understand why their behavior matters,
Yep.
has an impact
Please
on the
record
team.
that.
Yeah, I will. I will. Funny enough, we're recording this podcast the week of our Unicorn Society Philadelphia retreat, and my presentation at this retreat is managing client conflict. So it's very top of mind, and maybe I'll record a version of that presentation as a podcast. But thanks for a great conversation, Pete. I thought this was I hope we really covered the topic and answered the person's question. So thank you, dear listener. And if you enjoyed this podcast yourself, please leave us a 5-star review everywhere you listen. Helps us find other amazing listeners just like you. Thanks for a great chat, Pete. I'll see you on the next one.
Good talk. See you soon.